The import ban on legally hunted trophies that the government's pushing through at the moment does seem to me to be a very emotionally driven piece of legislation. It certainly isn't being motivated by evidence or by pragmatism or by genuine conservation outcomes. We can see quite clearly where endangered species or species on the brink of extinction have been brought back, purely using hunting as a means of doing it. The example that we might cite would be the Tajik markhor, which was basically hunted to the brink of extinction, primarily for meat by people in backwards areas, if you like, mountainous areas where there's very little protein. And these things are basically protein on the hoof as far as the locals are concerned, and they saw no reason to not shoot them and eat them. The only reason they were given to not shoot them and eat them was when people came along and said, well, if you don't shoot these, we'll bring somebody in from America or from a Western country who's prepared to hunt one and pay upwards of $100,000. And we'll only let them come and hunt 3 the first year, 5, 6 by the time the population's picked up again. And in return for that, the locals suddenly realised that by not shooting these animals and eating them, they would get proper cash. And therefore they looked after them. And as a result, those animals have come back from the brink of extinction to not even being on the endangered list anymore, according to the ICUN. So that's an absolutely tangible example of where an endangered species has been brought back purely with a hunting conservation program, giving that animal value to the people who ultimately get to say whether they wipe it out or look after it. And in these regions, the byproduct of that increase in the markhor numbers has been a benefit to snow leopards, which hunt markhor, which obviously were having problems because they were running out of prey to eat. When markhor numbers improve, snow leopards do better. So everybody's a winner. The local people are getting money in an area where money is very hard to come by. The animal that was endangered and was being predated by people is now being protected by those people. And the predators higher up the food chain, who rely on numbers of those animals to be able to feed themselves and their young, also did well. So these programs are proven to work. Another one would be the Bubi Valley Conservancy in Africa, where you've got an area which was a massive cattle station, pretty much devoid of wildlife. Private money came in, they put it back together again, they put some lions on it and enabled the few lions. I think the estimate was there were about 7 lions on there at the time. And over a period of about 30 years, it's become a prime habitat, not just for lions, but for all sorts of other species. The habitat has regenerated to the benefit of all the native fauna and flora. And it's paid for by a few people coming over and hunting surplus lions. Now, any piece of ground has got a maximum number of any given species that it can usefully hold. And it doesn't matter whether that's your lawn with rabbits on it. You have 2 rabbits living on your lawn, you don't have a problem, you have a nice lawn, you have 2 rabbits. You have 1,000 rabbits on your lawn, you don't have a lawn, and pretty soon the rabbits have nothing to eat, they get diseased and they all die. That's not to anybody's benefit. Africa, other parts of the world where habitat is under pressure, species are under pressure, exactly the same process manifests itself, just on a different scale. So where you have too many lions for an area to sustain, or too many elephants for an area to sustain, it makes absolute sense to pay for the management and the protection of those areas, the anti-poaching, the anti-logging, all the other protective programs that are paid for by sport hunting. Now, people also talk about the benefits of ecotourism replacing sport hunting, well, it just doesn't happen. The carbon footprint of a hunting camp is tiny. The carbon footprint of lots of people paying much less money to go on an eco safari where they get driven around in vehicles, they have to stay in a permanent camp with a lot more mod cons than a hunting camp. The number of people per dollar that you have to bring out in order to generate the same revenue is much harder on the environment and much harder to justify in these days of looking at the detrimental effects of carbon footprints and global tourism and jet setting around the world for tourism purposes. Hunting camp is probably the most effective and sustainable way of bringing the maximum amount of money into an area to protect it. The individual animals which are shot by sport hunters, trophy hunters, tend to be older animals. They're animals that would die anyway. Nothing in the wild lives forever or dies comfortably. So an old animal which has done its breeding, has had its life, spread its genes, it gets pushed out by a younger animal at some point and then will die a pretty horrible death, either fighting or starvation. So a hunter's bullet, while it may not be something that's palatable to a lot of people who are not involved with it and don't understand it, is actually a more humane death than those animals would otherwise get. Now, what will be the effects of banning trophies being imported into this country or into other countries, if America or Australia or New Zealand or other countries, Italy and so on, France, follow suit? Well, there are a number of things that might happen. One, some hunters may just take the view, well, it doesn't matter, I won't bring the trophies home, I'll take my photographs, I'll have my memories, and I'll hunt anyway. Because what the anti-hunting people don't appreciate really is that trophy hunting the trophy is a byproduct of the hunt. We hunt because we love hunting. Hunting takes us out into nature, it challenges us, it gives us all sorts of things which non-hunters just don't understand and frankly don't want to understand, so it's very difficult to explain it to them. But we will hunt regardless. It's a shame that we can't bring home the byproducts of the hunt. Once we've eaten the animal, it's got a skin, it's got a pair of horns, and we like to bring those home to remind ourselves of the hunt that we've experienced. If we're prevented from doing that, we'll still want to experience the hunting because really that's what we're in it for. There's really no upside. Nothing will improve in terms of what the anti-hunting people hope or think will be improved. So hunting will go on anyway. Where it doesn't go on, where, for example, Americans going out to the Booby Valley Conservancy to hunt lions don't do it, well, you're depriving that conservancy of the money that it needs to continue to survive, to the benefit of all the species there, not just the lions. And if that money is pulled away, and you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, up to $1 million a year, in an area where money is very difficult to generate for conservation programs, the government certainly won't pay for them. What you've got there is a very effective, self-sustaining environment, which is really succeeding for all the animals there. You'll simply strip it of money. It'll be a Pyrrhic victory because the place could quite conceivably cease to exist and go back to cattle ranching. And when that happens, the locals come in and they kill all the wildlife. They don't like lions. They compete with the cattle they eat the cattle. They don't like the ungulates because they compete with the cattle for food. So if you look at cattle farmed areas in Africa, they're basically dust bowls, which is why they have to keep expanding, because they have to expand into new territory in order to get some greenery because they've eaten it all. And this is the main problem in Africa. We've got human-animal conflict where the locals are eking out a living in a tough environment, and they do it by something which is very ecologically unsustainable, which is cattle ranching. And the more the cattle encroach into the wild areas, the more the wild animals and flora are pushed back. And we've seen where that's already decimated the wild areas of much of Africa, and that will simply continue. The only bulwark against that sort of expansion to date has been successful conservation hunting conservancies. If you fly over Tanzania and look down from a light aeroplane, you can see quite easily the dark green areas, which are the hunting concessions, full of greenery, full of local fauna, full of local native fauna. And surrounding these areas are dust bowls, which are the cattle stations. By banning trophy hunting, all you're going to do is increase the numbers of cattle stations and the areas of habitat which sustain the wild animals that the anti-hunting people purport to love and cherish and want to promulgate will simply be pushed back further and further and further. This is a nonsense law. It hasn't been thought through. It's emotionally driven, it's populist, and it's really unforgivable for politicians who've got the evidence and the knowledge at their fingertips to make this kind of legislation. And I'm very sorry to hear it happen. I think quite a few people will see it as a victory, but frankly, they're wrong. The scientific evidence is quite conclusive, and I hope in time they will come to realise that. But when they do, it may well be too late, but I would expect them to hang their heads in shame about the negative impact that they're going to have on the conservation of some species which they tell the world they're trying to save, but actually are doing nothing to save. They're just helping them to decline.